In this video, I'll provide an overview of throwing exceptions. When a method finishes executing, the normal flow, on completion of the method or on a return statement, goes back to the calling method and continues execution at the next line of the calling method. When an exception is thrown, program flow returns to the calling method, but not to the point just after the method call. Instead, if there's a try-catch block, program flow goes to the catch block associated with the try block that contains the method call. I'm going to demonstrate what happens if there's no try-catch block in DoThis. This diagram illustrates an exception originally thrown in DoThat being thrown to DoThis. The error isn't caught there, so it's thrown to its caller method, which is the main method. The thing to remember is that the execution will continue to be thrown back up the call stack until it's caught. But what happens if none of the methods in the call stack have try-catch blocks? That situation is illustrated by this diagram. Because there are no try-catch blocks, the exception is thrown all the way up the call stack. But what does it mean to throw an exception from the main method? This causes the program to exit, and the exception, plus a stack trace for the exception, is sent to the console. In this example, you can see what happens when the exception is thrown up the call stack all the way to the main method. This is very similar to an array index out of bounds exception. In both cases, the exception is displayed as a stack trace to the console. But there's something different about the array index out of bounds exception. None of the methods threw that exception. So how did it get passed up the call stack? The answer is that array index out of bounds exception is a runtime exception. The runtime exception class is a subclass of the exception class, but it's not a checked exception, so its exceptions are automatically thrown up the call stack without the throw being explicitly declared in the method's signature. A throwable is a special type of Java object. It's the only object type that's used as the argument in a catch clause, and it can be thrown to the calling method. It has three subclasses: error, which is automatically thrown to the calling method if created; exception, which must be explicitly thrown to the calling method, or caught using a try-catch block; and runtime exception, which is automatically thrown to the calling method. An exception that's not a runtime exception must be explicitly handled. An error is usually so critical that it's unlikely that you could recover from it even if you anticipated it. You're not required to check these exceptions in your code. An exception represents an event that may happen and which may be recoverable. You are required to either catch an exception within the method that generates it or throw it to the calling method. A runtime exception is usually the result of a system error, out of memory for example. Runtime exceptions are actually inherited from exception. You're not required to check these exceptions in your code, but sometimes it makes sense to do so. They can also be the result of a programming error. For instance, array index out of bounds is one of these exceptions.